greater good of America in general. We sort of lack that. So I agree with you. I would disagree, though, that America even necessarily needed a Protestant phase, because you had Catholic missionaries that would go out to Japan or
you
to
still
Africa.
see all the missions that were in California.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah.
And they just brought the, the cup. They brought their toolkit to administer the sacraments, and they laid down churches. And, there are no doubt problems with Catholicism in like the Latin American countries. Like you said, they're very pagan and they have remnants of paganism. With that being said, could we not argue that like Mexico and some of these Latin American countries, they're more conservative?
True. Very, very true. And I'm glad Nick is making this point. They are very conservative. Even though they come and they vote Democrat for this liberal world order, like, they're the ones going to church. Bro, craziest thing. I went to a parish about 15, 20 minutes away from where I live, right? And in that area now, it's a decent amount Hispanic. And so it was half white, half Hispanic at this parish. And this is a relatively recent development. Let's put the immigration status, on the shelf for now. But it was so beautiful, man. We're at this Catholic mass, and the priest, who's about 38, 39, like, he's a young priest, and he's saying the homily, English paragraph, Spanish paragraph, English paragraph, Spanish paragraph. And I don't speak Spanish great, but I took 3 years of Spanish in high school, and he was saying the same homily. Man, we all came together to share in the real presence of Christ in the mass, to partake in the body of Christ. It was beautiful. It was awesome. And yes, this community is very, very traditional. They're very conservative in their beliefs. They actually believe in the real presence of Christ, unlike a lot of the Catholics in America. So it's a very interesting point.
Yeah.
Than America. And it's a very complicated situation. There could be many reasons why, but I'm from Chicago, and I go sometimes to the masses in Spanish, and anyone who is in LA, Chicago, a city with a lot of Hispanics, maybe here, they'll tell you, you go to mass in an Hispanic community, and from morning until evening, it's packed. When I was living in
And this one was packed.
LA, when I was working for Kanye, I would go to mass at 7:00 at night, and it was packed. Like, people were standing at 7:00, but you'd also go in the morning and it's packed. And they are serious. They're crossing themselves all the time. Like, they're true believers. Now in America, I think they're going to lose it. Like, the next generation and the generation after that, they're going to lose their religion. They're going to apostatize because of the strength of our culture. But they're coming from Mexico, or they're coming from wherever, with a very strong faith, very strong tradition. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that the Catholic Church has been able to preserve all those things in a way that in a rebellious, liberated country, Protestants have not been able to preserve that. So I think inherently, for America to be repaired, spiritually, we have to be repaired and go back home. And for me, that's Rome. From my point of view, that's Rome. But I think even on some level, we talking earlier, you recognize that maybe it's a more hierarchical version of Protestantism.
I think it has to be.
It needs to go back there.
Yeah.
I'm not somebody that believes it's Protestantism. I believe it's Catholicism. I align with Nick. I think it's Rome. I don't know, man. Just seeing the universal church. I've been to mass in multiple different countries, multiple different languages. I've been to mass in, obviously, the United States. I've been to mass in Canada. I've been to mass in, Aruba. I've been to mass in Punta Cana. It's just in different parts of the country too. It's all the same. It's this beautiful unifying structure. You worship in the way that Christ intended. It is beautiful. And I think Catholicism could save us. It could save our country. But we do have to make a few tweaks to how we approach our country, this rebellious nature of our country. Yes, it is a problem. This unwillingness to conform, it is a problem. But I don't know, man. I see like a lot of Gen Zs converting, and it's not just like the trad phenomenon on the internet. Like they're meaningful. I know these people. I've been able to participate in some of these conversions. It's beautiful, man.
the rebellious spirit, I think you put your finger right on the point. It has to go. We have to repent of our rebellion. We are a rebellious, individualistic people, and we've got to stop that. And that rebellion has progressed. It's evolved. It's become worse. So there was a time where it's like, well, it's just against kings, and now it's kind of against any civil authority. And well, it's just against villages and feudal lord system. Well, now it's against even individual families. Right? I'm not a member of my family. I'm an individual, So it's like, at this point, it's like rebellion all the way down to, it's like now trying to split the atom. So now it's literally even not just rebellion against mom and dad at the molecular level of a family, but even at the atomistic level, multiple personality disorder or rejecting yourself through transgenderism. Like you're rebelling against yourself now. It's like, it's almost comical if it wasn't so tragic. And so, yeah, we've got to repent of the rebellious spirit that is just innate with who America is and kind of was always there, and it just kind of snowballed over time. There was a lot of great stuff. I love our country. I know you do too. But to pretend that our founding was perfect, to pretend that the bugs in the system weren't there from the beginning, I think is a bit naive. Like I think we should have been more explicit in the founding documents.
Yeah.
We should just like King Jesus, name him, say his name. I wish we would have. I understand the founders. I don't think they could even conceive of, well, one day there'll be millions of Muslims, something like, so I think I can see their reasoning for why, like the First Amendment. And people always say that like, well, they can't, you can't require religion and so you can set up a 90-foot tall, statue outside of Houston, that's like the Muslim sand demon, because the First Amendment is like, well, it's Congress shall make. Like, I don't think we should have a federal church in America. But there's actually, even the 13 colonies, they all had state churches. So there's technically nothing constitutional against Texas having.
That's very true. That's a very good point. There is nothing wrong with that. Because it did happen. The 13 colonies all did have state churches. Yes, it's very true. And everybody looks over that.
A state church, and Pennsylvania having a state church, even with the First Amendment, there's nothing against that. Congress can't do this. But my point is the fact that that's so easily misinterpreted now. Right. People don't even have the context for authorial intent. And they literally think like what was in the mind of George Washington was carving out a space for voodoo. It's like that people literally think that. Right. Like that's what makes America so great. So even if it wasn't their intent, they left the door open for where we are today. And you can go back and argue till you're blue in the face, but this is what they meant. This is what they meant. At a certain level, though, you might just have to say, well, they were wrong.
Yeah.
They were wrong. And just because they were wrong then doesn't mean we have to be wrong forever. We actually can, we love the founders in many ways, but also Benjamin Franklin was a degenerate, and Thomas Jefferson was ripping out, pages of the Bible. Like these guys were not perfect men.
Right.
If you had told Stephen the fate
like Apollo, Zeus, and I love that because, when you say that you're an American patriot or America first, we do sort of like deify the founding fathers. Yeah. And I see a lot of Protestants do this also. In Washington on the National Mall, they're literally like pagan gods. It's like statues of them like Zeus.
That's a very good point.
It's literally designed to be like Zeus or like Apollo. And I love that because it's like, yeah, they were fallible. They were flawed. They actually were not God and they are not saints and they weren't perfect. And like you said, the seeds, the germ of it was kind of there from the beginning. And now we have this prospect kind of getting back to the orcs versus the elves and the hobbits or the elves and the dwarves or all three or whatever. Now we have a situation where you could have, like in New York, a Muslim mayor of the city and, talking about Jewish people running for president and a prospect of maybe a secular person. What even do they believe in? I mean, can a person even truly, that's like you said,
it's the argument about Trump. He's a secular person. What does he believe? He's governing as a liberal, but he runs as this like far right guy. He says he doesn't know if he's getting into heaven. People interpret that how they will. There's the argument that he converted to Judaism in 2017. What does he believe? That's a question a lot of us have. It's interesting. Granted, our last Catholic president was Biden, but he was also like brain dead most of the time, so it was hard to see his Catholicity showing through. It's interesting, though.
Secularism can be like a substitute for religion, but if you're not serving any God, maybe you're serving the devil.
Yeah.
And that's kind of who we might have running our country. And if you think of the leader of the country as the father of the nation, the country as a unit, it all proceeds from the top. So this has given way to it's a huge opening for error and for problems. And on some level, if you just believe in Americanism or the American ideology, what even could you say against that? You know, could you say it would be arbitrary? Muslims should not be president. Jews should not be president. What about senator? What about Supreme Court? Can they write the laws, enforce the laws, interpret the laws? Where does it begin? Where does it end? And who's to say who's allowed and who isn't? And I think anyone on some level would recognize it's not American. It's also not right that we have like polytheistic gods. They're building giant statues of them all over our country. Are we going to live in a giant Diwali festival until the end of time? Like, no, that's not Western. It's not American. That's not Christian. It's not right. It's not the truth. And so there needs to be some recognition that that has to go in reverse, and it has to go towards an explicit identification of America as a Christian nation. And I think the basics are, you know, getting back to the Catholic Protestant unity, we believe in Jesus Christ. Amen. We believe in his resurrection. We believe in the Gospels. That's who we are. And that's what our country's going to be. And if you don't like it, leave. And you can't have any authority over us. If you're not a Christian,
then you're a guest.
Exactly. And
behave like one.
Behave like one, and you have no authority over Christians, over a Christian country, if that's not your creed. And for a time, there might have even been a valid counter argument, maybe for the Jews, but now you have Israel. So if they want to say, maybe 100 years ago, if they wanted to say, well, what about us? Well, now there is an explicitly Jewish nationalist state in the Middle East, alongside all the Muslim countries.
The Christians aren't allowed to have a country. Isn't that crazy? Even the country, our country that was founded on Christianity, they say we're not allowed to have this country for ourselves. Insane contradiction.
So if you want Islam, if you want Hinduism, if you even want rabbinical Judaism, there are plenty of other countries.
You have a place to go.
Right. But this is a Christian nation. And so, and that is the basis of Christian nationalism.
It's almost like you're a Zionist. You want the Jews to go home. You know, like I want them to actually have a nation state and stay in it. You know, stay over there. No, I completely agree. Here's another thing. So you were talking about America in particular, and one of the arguments that Protestants would use, and I agree with it. You know, but I think you gave a good counter. But one of the arguments is, well, but America was historically Protestant, so it's never allowed to be Catholic. Okay, take America in particular aside, and just thinking of nationalism on a global scale. Like you're a nationalist, at least as far as it goes. I'm a nationalist. That's one of my problems with Catholicism. So we can get into the theology in a moment.
I wonder if he's going to say that Catholics have an authority to the Pope, more so to authority to the Pope over the United States. Similar when you study like JFK when he was running. They say, oh, if a Catholic gets into the presidency, is Rome gonna have a direct line to the White House? Are they gonna have this influence on the United States? I'm interested to see if he's gonna make that argument.
Obviously, I would disagreements with theological points, primarily as it pertains to soteriology, salvation. But still speaking like politically and how religion works, in tandem with national politics. Catholicism, so I believe the Christian religion is universal, every tribe, tongue, and nation, right? Christianity is not a white religion. It's a human religion. It's for all peoples. And now I don't deny that, over the last, 1,500 years, starting from Constantine, or at least the last millennia, starting with, King Alfred, God has providentially worked in a unique way with Westerners. There's no doubt, which is incredible, and praise God for his grace. But I want as many people to be saved as possible. I'd also like for them to stay in their country, but I'd like for them to be saved. I don't mind if they're my neighbors in heaven, because the FBI, crime statistics in heaven will be zero. There's no more sin. We'll be okay. So all that being said, I do want nationalism, though, and Catholicism. It's not just universal. Protestants, in our view of Christianity and salvation, is universal. But there's a difference in a universal Christian religion and a globalism. And I think of Catholicism like it actually has a global headquarters. Whereas Protestantism, now I've already admitted it fractured too much. It's one thing to go down molecular. It's another to go down to atomistic. And so Protestantism has become so fractured and isolated and individualistic that it really has become a rebellious spirit and a problem. But to go all the way, to where it's, the Vicar of Christ, there's like one dude and one headquarters, and it's not just a spiritual headquarters, it's a geographic locale for all the world. So it's like, so when I think of nationalism politically and culturally, and knowing that there's going to have to be the national religious piece, how can Catholicism be conducive with nationalism?
I think that the way Catholics look at the nations, what G.K. Chesterton said is that the church is the mother of the nations, created the nations, because all the nations are under kings, Catholic kings. And I don't, at least in the 21st century, I don't hate the idea of the church having a global headquarters, because I like the idea that a head of state will listen to the advice of a spiritual leader, that there's someone kind of over and above and not representing.
But wouldn't it be great if each nation had that spiritual leader in their nation?
No, because that, like, for example, with Russia and Ukraine, their Orthodox churches, which are national, have kind of become a party to their conflict. And that's one of the reasons the Russian Orthodox Church is persecuted in Ukraine, is because Ukraine sees it as an extension of the Russian state, as operatives of the Russian state. And I like the idea of the Pope as a unifying figure that can give advice to the heads of state.
I mean, you talk about Pope Leo and Pope Francis and J.D. Vance, mind you. But just the Pope's relationship with the president and the vice president, especially of this administration, it's so cool that, we do have a Catholic vice president in the White House, and he does have that relationship with the Pope and the Vatican. Although I'm not a big fan of J.D. Vance, I understand the significance that there is. I question if his conversion to Catholicism was valid, and if he wasn't just doing it for political reasons, or if it was like a real conversion, a good faith conversion, and he was able to see Christ and be inspired enough to join his church. I think that's the coolest thing.
As a spiritual father, and be on some level neutral in a political sense. But I do agree that in recent, I'll give some concession here, which is that the Pope is clearly embraced a globalist ideology.
I mean, I saw the tweets when they selected, seeing, like some of his tweets on immigration. I was like, oh, this is not great.
It's brutal.
And then to follow it up with blessing blocks of ice. It's like,
yeah,
that was a hard day. I felt.
Also, too, you have to understand the blessing blocks of ice thing was something that was on Pope Francis's itinerary, and he had to continue with that and honor that. But again, look up Pope Leo. He talks about it's very important for countries to have borders. The only thing on immigration where he does tend to be more liberal is in the treatment of the people that you're deporting. I mean, yes, you have to like look this stuff up. He talks about having borders, and it's very important for countries to enforce their borders. He does speak about that. You just have to go and look it up. This is the media. This is the people always distorting the Vatican's message to just change it, to make it seem like it's one thing when it's really not. It's very interesting.
I was like, this is...
Go follow Pope Respecter on X. That guy is great.
It's been a tough 25 years on the planet.
This is a tough moment, yeah.
Or I guess ever since Pope Francis maybe. Yeah. Benedict wasn't so bad, but clearly Pope Francis and now this new Pope apparently also, it is taking an anti-national bent
Yeah.
ideologically critical of borders, the existence of borders.
Again, you got to watch him. He supports the borders. You have to look it up. The clips are there. What they're doing is taking them out of context.
Right.
This kind of climate politics, which does kind of beg for a global political
Pope Leo is very trad, just to be clear.
action.
And so to me, that seems like, oh, that's just the consistent application of Catholicism.
Right.
I see those. I actually see those actions of like, this is the natural, the logical outflow. But you're saying, to be fair to your argument, you're saying, no, I don't think that's inherent to Catholicism. It doesn't have to be.
I don't. I think that that just sort of goes with the territory. I think that the Catholic Church, the older generations, are very liberal because the Catholic Church was animated in the last century by social justice, which had a different kind of
Very true. It's a very good point.
flavor. And, they were, it's the love of the poor. It's this sort of thing, particularly among the Jesuits. And that's what we had was a Jesuit Pope.
Something, and again, I'm going to stop interrupting in a second, but something everybody you need to understand if you're Catholic or if you're not Catholic and maybe you're curious about being a Catholic. My mom is the director of religious education for one of the parishes locally. And what she does is she meets with the diocese once a month. And they have these meetings, and she describes to me, because she knows I'm like so involved. I love talking about faith and theology and all that stuff. She talks about how she hears that like the older priests, like above 50, 45 and above, are all like very liberal. But once you get to like the millennial, the Gen Z priests, they're very, very conservative because of the world that we've all grown up in. I mean, since birth, we've lived in a kind of a post-religious country, a post-religious world. And so a lot of us that would have been just normal Catholics and maybe normal liberals or conservatives, moderate perhaps, and we're kind of going to be laissez-faire with our religion. That's like the trajectory. We've seen this, and it's caused us to sink our teeth into Catholicism and become more religious and become a little bit more conservative in our beliefs. So as a result, the reaction is you have these very traditionalist Catholics and priests. So I don't know if he's going to talk about that, but I just want to tell you the future is very bright.
For many years. I think that as time goes on, the newer generations of the clergy will reflect kind of the contemporary spiritual state of Catholics in reaction to feminism, postmodernism, nihilism. I think you're going to get maybe a different flavor down the road.
Look at me predicting all this stuff. Look at me. How about that?
And I would say maybe the benefit of being Catholic, or the asterisk next to it, is that the Pope is only infallible in very specific context. Yeah. Right. Which has only been invoked twice on Marian dogmas, not on open borders. The way that some Protestants critique it, you'd think that
that's true. It's
an infallible dogma, like thou shalt not have borders, which is not really the case. But I will admit the current clergy is very liberal. And I do think that they've frequently crossed the line into pushing a globalist ideology, but I don't think that's inherent in the religion.
I think you're right. Right before they selected the most recent Pope, I like to predict. It's just fun. It's not even that I think I'm particularly good at it. I have a decent batting average, but it's just fun, and it takes some courage because, when you're predicting something, you could be wrong, so, but people are like, we're going to get, a based Pope and, he's going to, and I was like, I think you're going to get a gay Pope. And I think the reason why is because it wasn't just arbitrary. I had a reasoning behind it, because the Catholic Church is a massive institution, and institutions are always behind the people. Like they move more slowly. And so that's the strength, right? So that's the strength of Catholicism. So with like Protestants, it could divide and conquer. And like I was arguing, I think that in many ways that was necessary, in America's founding. Catholicism, but then it became a liability where we are today. Catholicism, kind of like the flip of that. It's, it's cohesive, it's organized, it's unified. And the benefit of that is that you don't have, like a random, coup in this church and this new person becomes a pastor and it's a chick with blue hair, like Catholics can avoid that in a way that sadly some Protestants cannot. So it moves more slowly. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is that, when things are already off the rails, and you're not, so you slowly compromise, right? Whereas Protestants compromised fast.
Right.
Slowly compromise. Okay, that's a strength. The weakness, though, is like, okay, but once you're compromised, to reform it is also going to be slow. And so my prediction was, it's like, well, look at what's happening around the world, Hungary, you know, and Bukele with El Salvador. Like, I think we're going to get a base Catholic Pope. And I was like, no, the Catholic Church will probably be 20 years behind this transition. So we're actually probably going to experience the worst of the whole, you know, the of secularism coming to a head. What we experience culturally and politically, you'll probably get the aftershock of that religious, you know, within the Catholics expression of that secularism 20 years after the fact, you know, because they'll still be catching up. And then
That's not a bad point.
and that generation will have to die, kind of almost like Joshua, you know, or Moses with the Israelites wandering the desert, because it's like, we've got an entire generation that doesn't get, you know, they got to die off before, you know, the next one gets to go in with Joshua and Caleb. And I think that's, so I think you probably do get a based Catholic Pope after 20 years after politically and culturally things have already kind of righted.
Yeah. And I would say that to the credit of the Catholic Church, you're right. It's a very conservative institution, not like ideologically, but like temperamentally. It's like you said, it's slow to change. And unfortunately, what's conservative now is like being a mainstream liberal or something like that.
One thing before he goes off on this topic, you have to understand that what Joel Webbon is saying, the Catholic Church being 20 years behind, he makes a good point, but let's think about this. The Catholic Church is the only Christian denomination that still says birth control is wrong and it's immoral and it's a sin. Up until the point where, the Catholic Church is so pro-life that condoms are wrong and it's frowned upon. This stuff like IVF, IUDs, hormonal birth control, condoms are a form of birth control. That stuff is frowned upon because it prevents life from being born, by being created. That's how far. And they have not budged on this issue, and they will never budge on this issue. Being pro-life is also being anti-war. They're not going to be like the evangelicals and jump on the Zionist Israel train and say, oh, we should bomb 200,000 or 2 million Palestinians and kill them all because they could all be Hamas. No, they're saying, thou shalt not kill, and let's enforce that commandment. Like, you have to admit, like, them being a little bit behind and when it comes to this stuff, like, it's benefited them a lot. So that's just an aside.
But I just lost my train of thought. What were we saying about?
Well, just it changes slowly, and maybe we'll get a conservative pope. After
yes.
the fact.
To the credit of the Catholic Church, it will never be progressive,
Right.
Which is, and I think to your point about the critique with Protestants, not something that you could really take for granted. Which is to say that in the 21st century, in the current year, when they're outdoing themselves with how radical they can get with transgenderism. And it seems like the dominoes fall so quickly. It went from like everybody seemed to sort of be against homosexuality. And now it's like, if you're not on board with like transgender kids, you know, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist. The Catholic Church, to its credit, is holding the line against all of it, against feminism, against every form, contraceptives, you know, even sodomy, like, you know, within marriage, within heterosexual, it's very conservative in terms of the politics of sex, sexuality itself, the gender dynamics. It's conservative in the face of all of that stuff, which, you know,
you can't take it for granted, man.
On the contrary, with a lot of Protestant sects, I mean, they are as liberal as it gets. And I recognize it's not all of them, but you've got Protestant churches with straight up BLM, trans, rainbow
Episcopalians, man.
flags. And, you know, in this period of radical change, the Catholic Church seems to be one of the only things that stays the same. And, you know, and I understand that, of course, there are liberal priests and liberal bishops, and you know, even in Europe, they're rebelling, they're pushing the envelope, they're trying to bless gay unions.
In Germany,
in opposition against Rome, in opposition against the church, but it's the exception. It's not the dogma, and you still feel something familiar when you go to a Catholic church. There's still the tradition. There's still the reverence. There's still some, even in the most liberal Novus Ordo churches, there's still some passing resemblance to the Mass and the sacraments that have been around for 2,000 years. And I know a lot of traditional Catholics would say, and they do, they say, oh no, it's completely different. It could be a lot worse in the context of where the world is. So that is what I actually admire, is that it is maybe the most conservative institution in the world at this point.
That's a great point, man. It just makes you so thankful to be Catholic. Again, I'm biased, but I believe we have the best tradition because it came from Christ. Everything about Catholicism, I mean, you look at the churches, you look at the cathedrals. I'll be going to New York in a couple of weeks, and we're going to go to St. John's Cathedral. I'm just, and you, even in Europe, man, you look at these grand cathedrals in Spain, all of these beautiful structures that people weren't paid to build, by the way. Some of these structures took hundreds of years to build. And again, the church is not the physical building. But in terms of the reverence to God, these people built these churches knowing that possibly it will not be completed in my lifetime. And a lot of them did it for free, and they did it out of their Catholic faith. They did it out of their faith for God because they were so on fire for Christ. It's just truly inspiring.
Yeah, that's admirable. So some of my Reformed Protestant buddies and our listeners, that's at this point, maybe only half of our audience, but still a sizable portion, and talking to them about, doing this project with you. They, were sending me, some of them were like, that's great. I'm glad that you're doing it. And then others were like, that's terrible. How could you, why would you have Nick? And so they're, trying to dissuade me. And so a couple of them sent like a clip of you saying that, that there is no salvation outside of the church, which I've heard. That's Catholic rhetoric. That's not novel or anything like that.
That's an argument.
But there's ways of interpreting, what somebody means when they say that. So just point blank, I've got you on the air. Do all Protestants go to hell?
Well, we don't know. That's really the Catholic answer. And what the Catholic Church reserves is the possibility that non-Catholics will go to heaven. And there's actually rules for how this works, because the question is always, what about someone that's never heard of Catholicism?
Right.
And for those people that really have never had access to Christ, we say it's really more about conscience. And everyone has the moral law, the natural law written on their heart. And if
Romans
they follow
1 and
that,
2. Yeah.
right. And then there are people where it's a question of, did they have the ability to look into Catholicism? Did they sort of refuse it? And so there's accommodations that are made.
I refused, Nick.
So, well, in your case, you might be going to hell. But in the end, and I'll tell you, this is my position, which is very controversial in the Catholic Church. I tend to the belief that we should hope for a general salvation. It's very controversial, this universal salvation. And the Catholic, we're not allowed to say that everyone is saved.
Right.
We're allowed to hope that everyone is saved, that hell is empty or mostly empty. And so I definitely tend towards a more liberal interpretation, which is that more are saved than not saved.
That's actually interesting, because that is my view. Now I get there through a different route, but my view is I'm post-millennial in my eschatology. So eschatology, just a belief of the end times. I don't believe in a rapture. I'm not a dispensationalist. I'm not premillennial. I'm not all millennial. I'm post-millennial. And to put it in a nutshell, the easiest way I could say it is, for most premillennial guys, not so much the historic premillennial, but especially Disby, Zionist, premill guys, they believe that Christ wins. Everybody believes Christ wins, to be fair and steelman the argument. It's not that they believe that Christ loses. They believe he wins, but they believe Christ wins despite a weak, kind of shrinking remnant of a church. That the church will be saved, but saved by the bell. It's like, Jesus, please don't tarry, come back quickly, because everything's going to hell in a handbasket. But we, the few, the proud, the remnant remain, and we can't really do anything, and we're certainly going to lose. But we're going to, by your grace, you're going to sustain us. We'll make it all 12 rounds, and we'll be saved by the bell, and Christ will return and vanquish his enemies. and save the church. I'm post-millennial, so I believe Christ wins, but rather winning despite a losing church. I believe he wins through the church. That the church, the body of Christ here on earth, will be progressively and gradually victorious throughout the actual temporal gospel age. Now, that doesn't mean, just like the stock market, right? You look at it over 100 years, it goes up. That doesn't mean it goes up every day, and so I'd say like we're in a hell of a dip. Like I would say, like we're like a 350-year dip right now. So it's like onward Christian soldier. And right now, the Christian soldiers are getting their butts kicked, like from the Enlightenment, you could argue even earlier and things like that. Like we've lost some serious ground. But I do believe, you look at the time of Christ, you look at where we are today, and there's no denying, were there more disciples when Jesus was walking the earth or today? Were there, you look at what God has done, and it's not just that he's saving people, in the life to come in a spiritual heavenly sense, but like the gospel has gone forth and is shaping the nations, not just saving individual people spiritually, but actually forming civilization and all these developments. It was Christians, who innovated and created and all these different things, that Christ gets the glory for that. And so I actually do believe that not only that Christ wins because he saves a losing church when the bell rings in the final analysis, but that Christ will win as head of the church through his church progressively and gradually, with dips along the way, throughout history, throughout history, that the mustard seed will grow into a great tree,
I wish that Nick kind of pushed back and asked Joel what his definition of the church is. Does it encapsulate like all of Catholicism, sects of Christianity? Like, what is his definition of the church? I'm always very interested to hear the Protestant perspective of what they interpret the church to be.
That the leaven will actually work through the whole batch of dough. There's so many parables where Jesus talks about this. And so like even Protestants like Charles Spurgeon, people have called me a heretic for this. I'm like, and people who love Spurgeon, I'm like, I actually was quoting Spurgeon, and they, they have egg on their face. But Spurgeon famously believed that the crowds of heaven would dwarf and utterly eclipse the population of hell, and he argued it, and it's like, well, how? I mean, there's so many people that don't believe in Jesus, You just look at America. It's like right now, like really, Joel, you think more people in America today are truly born again Christians than not? And I would never even try to make that case. I think that's pretty silly. It definitely seems like genuine Christians are a minority, certainly in the West. But he argued, Spurgeon, he talked about, what about all the babies that died in the womb? What about infants? What about, and then
60 million children have been killed as a result of abortion from whenever Roe v. Wade was codified into law till now. 28% of Gen Z was killed in the womb. Already, over a fourth of us are dead because of abortion. It's an interesting point. It's a very sad point, but it's true. But you have to think that those children that weren't allowed to be alive are going to be saved.
Argued further and saying like, okay, so right now maybe hell is more populated than heaven, but let Christ cook. Let him cook. Look at the trajectory. Look at the way Christianity has shaped the world. Look at the way that it's permeated like leaven, the whole batch of dough. If this is what's happened in 2,000 years, if Christ tarries, right? Because I'm not pre-mill. I don't think he's coming back next Thursday. No man knows the day or the hour, but I think it may be a while. And I think even if it's not, we should have that mentality. Part of the reason that we're going to hell in a handbasket is because Christians with their eschatology, thinking that Jesus is going to come back next week, we checked out, and it's like, no wonder we're losing. So you should live as though it's going to be a while till Christ returns, whether it is or it's not. And if I had to guess, I think it will be a while, because I think that part of what God's doing in this cosmic battle against, his arch, enemy, Satan, is not just saving the church, but Christ is going to utterly defeat, but not just defeat, but humiliate Satan. Like Colossians even says it, like through the cross, like he held the demonic spirits to open shame. It's not enough to just beat them. Our God he's masculine, and he's kind of a Chad. Like our God, like he doesn't just defeat his enemies, he shames them. He humiliates them. He mops the floor with them. And it'd be one thing for Christ to beat Satan. It's another for him to take puny little guys like us and by the sanctifying power of his Spirit over the gospel age through 2,000 years and then maybe 3,000 or 4,000 to actually win the world throughout human history in this temporal age and not just in the 17th dimension, and just totally humiliate Satan and humiliate all these false gods that, Islam and Judaism and Hindu, and it's like, oh no, like the Christian God, not only was he true, not only was it right, but it was also best. It was best. And so all that being said, I do think that there will be more in heaven than in hell. But I would argue it through that kind of path. That said, what do you think? I'll give it to you, but what do you think the average Protestant would say? And maybe more particularly, what do you think I would say if you now, just reverse the question, like, do I think all Catholics are going to hell?
Well, I know Protestants really don't like the Catholic Church. So
It is interesting when particularly the evangelicals, but Protestants in general, some of the most good-hearted, kind people on the surface, as soon as the Catholic Church is mentioned, man, they turn on a dime and boom, boom, like arrows, fangs grow from their teeth, like just the demonic, like this energy, like where'd that come from? Where'd all that anger come from? Like, you really hate the Vatican that much? You hate the Pope that much? Boom, 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 boom. Fangs, horns grow from their foreheads. Insane. They don't like us.
oh, you see us as heretics. So I would imagine you think we're going to hell.
I see the Pope as a heretic. I see him as not the Antichrist, but an Antichrist. First John says there are many Antichrists that have gone out into the world. And so, that's literally in the traditional Reformed confessions. So it's like, it's kind of like part of being Reformed. At the same time, though, I know what time it is. I don't have to be such a purist that I'm, they're the good autists and then they're the insufferable ones. And I'd like to think I'm not one of the latter. So yes, I do, like in keeping with Protestant, historical Reformed theology, I would affirm that. But I'll say this, I think you'll like this. I do find it suspicious that the reformers of whom I love, Luther, Calvin, these guys, they're taking all these scriptures like Revelation, about synagogues of Satan and the Antichrist. Who is the Antichrist? Like the Bible, the New Testament says, he who denies that Jesus came in the flesh. Catholics don't deny that Jesus came in the flesh.
Not at
Jews
all.
do.
Right.
Like, why is it that reformers, Protestant reformers, exegeted so many of these scriptures from the Bible to apply to Catholics when the men who wrote them, the apostles, they were applying them to Jews?
Right.
So the apostles, we know who they were talking about. We know who their enemy was not the Pope. It was, their enemy was the Judaizers.
Right.
It was the Sanhedrin. It's very clear, like, who's the synagogue of Satan? I wonder. No, it's literally a synagogue. That's,
Right,
that's what they meant, and then the reformers are like, no, it was, they knew that, a few centuries later, it would actually be, Rome. And so I understand how exegesis works. I think that scripture has one meaning, but can have various applications. And so I don't think I'm Reformed. So shocker, I don't think they were wrong. That said, though, I think that there is still something for timeless truths and timely truths. Right now, in this timely moment, to think that Catholics are like the predominant enemy of Protestants, I think is just retarded. I think it's retarded. It's like, dude, we've got way bigger fish to fry. So all that being said, I do think that Catholicism contains a number of heresies. But I do think it's also important for Protestants and vice versa for Catholics to distinguish. There's a difference in me dogging on Catholicism versus Catholics.
Right.
Catholics and Catholicism are two different things. I think that the average Catholic here in America is actually probably a great Christian. Now, personally, I think it's because the average Catholic is a bad Catholic, which makes for a great Christian. So I love Catholics. But yes, I don't like Catholicism.
Yeah. Well, and I would say, we have a specific admonition, according to the Pope, against what we would call religious indifferentism. And this idea that it's a battle against secularism, and what we really need is to rally around religion in general, or even Christianity in general, with Protestantism. Like, it's very clear from Catholic doctrine, we need to be pro-Catholic.
Right.
We need to be according, because we view you guys as heretics. But I would agree with you that in this day and age, is not secularism and nihilism the
Right.
bigger force? Is
Right.
that not what actually threatens our
Islam,
existence?
Judaism. I mean, like, and people always say, well, oh, like only 20% of, Jews actually are even practicing Jews. Most of them are secular. And I would say that is Judaism.
Right. Yeah.
Like, honestly,
Yes.
like, and
point.
beyond secularism, to put a little bit more of a fine point, liberalism, I think, is largely a Jewish
Absolutely.
project. It is like, if I said liberalism, all these different implications, but if it was liberalism was the car, I would say the engine is like the heartbeat of liberalism is egalitarianism. And egalitarianism, I do believe there's those dots are real easy to connect. That is the direct result of Judaism that sought to ultimately like dismantle and bring down every form of hierarchy because of this self-preserving. And I even get it. I actually get why you would do that. Like, you don't have your own country. You're a minority everywhere you go, and so you're wanting to level the playing field, but I think that, like, right now, secularism is a big enemy. I think right, the foundation of that is this classical liberalism, and classical liberalism, the engine of that is egalitarianism. And egalitarianism, I'm like, yeah, sure, a lot of white people participate in that, but I'm like, that's kind of Jewish.
Well, and why do we have religious pluralism? Who pushed that so hard? It was a lot of Jewish activists, because who would be against, let's say, prayer and...
It was the syndicate, man. That's what we're calling them now. From now on this channel, we are calling them the syndicate. That's the code word in case censorship comes back. But even if it does come back, man, that's the code word. They are now the syndicate. I'm coining it now. I don't think I'm actually coining it, but I'm coining it on this channel. Maybe in real life I'm coining it, but right now, from now on, they are the syndicate. You're welcome.
Schools in the 20th century, who would be against stridently the mixing of church and state?
It's the syndicate.
It was the Jews, who were not Christians, who did not support that for obvious reasons. That's why they made up the kind of civil rights brigade, ACLU, ADL, these types, that said it's actually a form of discrimination to have any kind of explicit Christian culture, even Christian laws for that matter. So everywhere you look at where the Christian tradition or religion has been subverted or undermined or thrown off in America, it is typically these Jewish lawyers, because they fall outside of that. And the germ of that goes all the way back to Baruch Spinoza in the 16th century. He's the one that introduced biblical criticism and looking at the Bible not even as inspired, but as
criticism.
Right, as historical, and ripping it apart in leading the radical Enlightenment, and this idea that Christianity only serves to bolster the power of the monarchs. And it's almost like a Marxian interpretation of religion as a form of power. So it's been there from the beginning. They've been leading the charge against it. So I totally agree with that. It is fundamentally part, and it's not to say that, of course, Protestants, they have been very liberal also. And, and secular types have as well. But
not all of them, but the majority.
Yeah. And
it is the majority.
But it's inherent in Judaism because of the tension between Christian and Jewish civilization. I mean, and it even extends into, I would say, communism. When you look at the organized Jewish community throughout European history, they hate the Catholic Church. Yep. They hate the Catholic kings.
Bro, this like translates to now. You have people like Mark Levin that are calling out Jack Posobiec for holding up a rosary at Turning Point USA. And it's like, they do hate the Catholic Church. The syndicate does hate the Catholic Church. Yes, that is something that still holds up today. It is insane, man.
They hated the Tsar of Russia, and that's because in every place they resided, the Catholic king tried to forcibly convert them, or expelled them, or burned their Talmud, or segregated them into the Pale of Settlement. And so everywhere you find rebellion, like against the Spanish king, the Jews were leading the charge. When you see the invasion of England, the Jews were backing William of Orange because they had been expelled from England for hundreds of years. When you see the communist revolution in Russia, who goes into the Winter Palace and executes the royal family, the Romanovs? It's these Jews that hated the Tsar, Alexander III, Nicholas II.
They hate authority.
Well, and they hate authority, but they also hate Christian authority.
Yeah, you're right.
Because it marginalizes them and frequently abuse them. That's fair, but they sought vengeance against them and undermined it. And so that's present everywhere in liberalism and communism, the Masonic, Illuminist, Enlightenment. It's there every step of the way in opposition to Christian Western civilization.
I will say this. Protestants, modern Protestants have been just suckers for Zionism, which sucks. It's
Come over, Joel. Come over. Come back home. It's only a matter. Come back home, Joel.
you know, that's an L that I have to wear. But the original protester, you're not a huge fan, I'm sure, but
Right.
Martin Luther, I mean, the last book he wrote,
Yeah.
Jews and Their Lies, hashtag we're so back.
Yeah.
That was pretty, he was so real for that.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts on this episode?
I would just say, you know, I know that Catholics are going to watch this and they're going to say, you know, Nick didn't go hard enough.
He was too nice. It was, hit me at the end.
I'm not saying that, mind you. I think Nick's meeting Joel where he is, and this is a really good faith discussion. This is good. This is what we need. So I don't think that at all.
Well, no, and I was going to say,
but
I was going to say, and vice versa. But my point is to say to Catholics and Protestants, and even the Ortho Bros, anybody, you know, all Christians. For me, if you, like you said, if you believe that Christ was a real person, took flesh, died on the cross, rose again for our salvation, I consider you a brother. I consider you a Christian brother and a friend. And I think we have a lot more in common in the battle than we do, you know, that we disagree on. So I really believe that we have these disagreements and they're fruitful, and when it's going to be, there's a dialectic, there's a conversation to be had. But I think politically, we really need to unite and be on the same page, because
100%.
all it takes is you visit the DNC and you see the freak show that's going on, or even honestly, the modern GOP, when they're doing the call to Waheguru and all this Hindu stuff. It's like, we really got to stick together. So I'm really pushing a message of unity.
Good. Agreed. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for.
All right, there it is, everybody. What did you think about this interview? I loved it. I love stuff like this. I came to this conclusion recently. If, you know, something were to happen and I had to quit this stuff and I had to go to like one particular thing, ditch political commentary, ditch like social commentary, I would specifically go and try to help convert other people to Christianity, to Catholicism. I think that's what this whole, like, the Catholic content, more and more I've been kind of called to it. And I know it doesn't do well in terms of viewership, but like just diving back into my prayer life and really entrenching myself. I'm a cradle Catholic, but really entrenching myself in my Catholic faith is something that's done a great deal of good for me. And it's helped me to feel the presence of Christ, and it's just awesome. And so I encourage you all to check out Catholicism, and not just for the trad movement, but actually try and seek Christ out in your own lives, because it's spectacular. So that's all. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your night or day, depending on when you're watching. Bye-bye.